So good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. My name is Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. For more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the QEM Heroes Initiative. The Heroes program brings together experienced researchers who've worked in federal agencies to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. Our goal is to build sustainable ecosystems for STEM research and education at colleges and universities across the country, not just at those with large funding portfolios. We hope this series promotes engagement with our Heroes Fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. During the webinar, please use the Q&A tool to ask questions of the panelist. The panelist and moderator will monitor and answer questions during the webinar as time allows. Once this presentation is over, we will moderate a discussion and give attendees the opportunity to raise their hands and ask questions live. I'm happy to introduce our presenter today. Dr. David Richards is a Heroes Fellow with QEM Network, as well as an associate with Agora Education Research. Previously, he was an employee at the U.S. Department of Education, where he served for 10 years as an education statistician. Prior to federal employment, he earned a PhD in psychology at the University of Florida, after which he worked for 5 years as an education researcher at UNCF's Patterson Research Institute. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to David.
Hi, good morning or afternoon, whichever it may be, wherever you may be. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you for joining us for this webinar where I'm going to be discussing how to access and explore federal education data. I am formerly a education statistician with the National Center for Education Statistics, where I was until I was RIFed last year. But I still am somewhat in the habit of thinking myself as an education statistician with NCES. So I may sometimes refer to what we did there using the first person plural we rather than they. So I apologize if I cause any confusion in that regard, but those mental habits have not been lost yet. But it's my pleasure always to talk about these data. I love these data. I loved working on them. I love sharing them with the world, sometimes in very high self-regarding moments. I'll describe myself as a data evangelist, because I'm very excited about what these data can do for students, for researchers, for academics, for policymakers, for think tanks, for media, or even just anybody who's shopping for a college. These data have the potential to provide a lot of value to a lot of people who use them. I will be focusing mostly on post-secondary data, and I hope that is interesting and useful to our audience here, given I think we're all at least adjacent to the post-secondary sector if we aren't working in post-secondary specifically. And I'll be talking about how to access and explore post-secondary data provided by the National Center for Education Statistics at the Department of Education. There we go. So I'm going to, for the benefit of those who aren't familiar with NCES and what it is and its history, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to NCES. And then I will tell you about some of the post-secondary data available from NCES, specifically IPEDS and NCSAS. And then I will give you a superficial, rather abbreviated introduction to how to use IPEDS data, as well as how to use NCSAS data. With NCSAS data, there's a couple of different options that we'll go into because NCSAS data has some additional restrictions around it that IPEDS data does not. So I'll discuss what those restrictions are and what your options are for using NCSAS data when we get there. And then we'll have some time for questions. So a little bit about myself. You heard the overview at the beginning from Christine. I was originally at the University of Florida for my PhD. I also got my bachelor's there. So I have, over the course of my life, studied at University of Florida for 9 years. Um, but I got my PhD in social psychology and in 2010. And even though I am a social psychologist by training, that particular PhD program had a heavy statistics component. Um, and our statistics classes were taught by a professor at the College of Education. So being an education researcher, he tended to train us on education data. And that was actually my first exposure to NCES data when in a multi-level modeling class. We used data from PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. So I used when it was time for me to hunt for a job, at the conclusion of the program, I still had my term paper from that class where I used, multi-level modeling on some education data, and I sent that to the head of research, at the head of the Patterson Research Institute at UNCF, um, as a sort of like a bit of demonstrative proof that I knew how to analyze education statistics, and it seems to have helped. I was hired at UNCF, and I worked there from 2010 to 2015, where um, I got a lot more familiarity and expertise using post-secondary NCES data, like IPEDS and IPSAS data, which I used to study HBCUs and HBCU students primarily. And then in the course of becoming familiar with that data, I decided I'd like to actually work on these data and help produce them and collect them, and for the benefit of other researchers who have very ambitious research goals, but don't have the budgets that allow them to collect lots of original data. So I applied to the U.S. Department of Education, where I was hired by the National Center of Education Statistics. And from 2015 to 2025, I was a project manager for large scale sample studies of post-secondary students. The thing about NCES is we don't do a lot of research primarily. We don't do a lot of primary research activities in-house. We tend to contract out those work to contractors. And those of us statisticians actually employed at NCES are more program and project managers who review deliverables and manage budgets and sort of recommend paying invoices and so forth. So it was a very high level view of how these data are collected and processed and produced and made suitable for the public to use. So that's a bit of my history. I want to go a little bit into the history of NCES itself, the National Center for Education Statistics. It is the U.S. federal agency responsible for collecting, analyzing, and reporting education data, established under 20 U.S. Code 9541. It's part of the Institute of Education Sciences, which is itself housed in the United States Department of Education. NCS has not always been part of IES, and actually, NCS has a sort of interesting history of where it sits in the federal government, which I'm going to also dig into a bit for your edification. But it is one of many U.S. federal statistical agencies, sitting alongside probably the most famous Census Bureau, but others you may or may not have heard of. I think most of us know about BLS and others, but there's quite a lot of quite a large number of statistical agencies, and this is not even a list of all of them. But so NCES is one of many such agencies in the government. Okay, so quick pop quiz, and feel free to type answers into the chat. Um, how old would you guess is the National Center for Education Statistics? And we don't need an exact number, but you can say A, about 50 years, B, about 100 years, C, about 150 years, or D, about 200 years. Feel free, if you don't mind, if you're interested, if you want to take a guess, to type your answers into the chat, and I'll let you know which is correct. Oh, I see. Here we go. All right. Okay. A wide range of options here. I won't keep you in suspense. This is not an exact answer, but the closest answer is C, about 150 years, although it really depends. I think we at NCS liked to brag about being 150 years old, which dates NCS to about the 1860s, but it kind of really depends on what you mean by NCES specifically. Are you talking about the organization by that name, or are you talking about sort of like the long-running federal statistical project undertaken by the U.S. federal government? Um, so to help put it in perspective, here's a timeline um, of the last, I guess, put that at 60 years of NCES history. Now, you might think NCS is inside the Department of Education as we know it, which was established in 1979 to 1980. Um, but really, NCS, or what we might now call NCS, has not always sat within the Department of Education. It's been moving between organizations and agencies, and it's also undergone several name changes going back to the 1860s. So in 1867, there was the Department of Education Act, which established a U.S. Department of Education. And at this point, the U.S. Department of Education was really uh, uh, NCS was, I think, a primary part of its work, a chief component of its work. And in 1870, that then Department of Education or Office of Education began statistical surveys, collecting education data. But it wasn't until almost a century later that there was a National Center for Education Statistics established by that name, which was continuing this work, but which the duty of which was to prepare and publish the Digest of Education Statistics, which is an annual digest of education statistics that NCS is still producing to this day. So another pop quiz, and this is not multiple choice, so feel free to just free response type options, guesses into the chat window. Despite being separated by 155 years, what did the 1870 NCS have in common with the 2025 NCS? What was true of NCS in 2025 that was also true of NCES in 1870? Feel free to uh, share your guesses, um, and I'll let you know. And there's really a lot of possibly correct answers, um, but the one I want to zero in on is, not having enough funding for operations. That's actually pretty close to the answer I'm angling towards. So I'll go ahead and give the gold star to Hope for that. Relatedly, staff size. So just to share some ideas here, in his 1870 report to Congress, the Commissioner of Education thanked Congress for the addition of two new clerks to help him in his office, which effectively increased the staff size from one by 300% from 1 to 3 staff. And most recently, last year, as you know, in 2025, as part of a large-scale reduction in force by the Department of Education, most NCE staff, including myself, were dismissed. So that was about a 97% decrease from about 94 to 3 staff. So back then, as well as more recently, you had a very, very small group of people handling a lot of paperwork. So NCS has had a very, very interesting history, and last year it was dealt a pretty heavy blow by this reduction of force to the point where you could almost say it was set back about 150 years in terms of its capacity. I don't think it's exactly right because, of course, now we've still got a lot of contracts and contractors that I don't know. But anyway, yeah, that riff last year was pretty hard on NCES and set the agency back pretty far. Um, so, uh, but in terms of that more recent work, as I mentioned, I want to focus on post-secondary statistics, and I'm going to focus on two post-secondary statistical sort of survey study programs that began in the 80s. So in the 1980s, shortly after the what we now know as the Department of Education was established, um, we began the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, or IPEDS. And then in the 80s, we also first conducted the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study. So those are our two chief statistical products that come out of NCES. And they are similar in some ways, but they're also very complementary in others. And if you're not familiar with what IPEDS are and what NIPSAS are, but if you're interested in using federal post-secondary data to do post-secondary research, then it may be difficult to know which of these two studies, which of these two data sets or data collections would be most useful to you. And I want to try to give you a sense of which of those you might use. So I'm going to sort of describe them in a bit more detail, and I'm going to try to contrast them as well. Someone asked, how is the agency able to function properly with that type of reduction? I do not know. On those weeks leading up to our reduction in force, so we received the RIF notices in March, but the month before in February, we saw many contracts canceled unilaterally, and that included the NIPSAS contracts for the studies that I worked on. IPEDS, I don't think shared that same fate. But I think a sort of simplified answer is that with that kind of reduction in capacity, you have to drastically reduce the work. And that included in practice canceling a lot of contracts. And canceling a lot of studies. And I cannot speak, I could speculate or share rumors, but I don't trust myself to speculate or speak to what the status is of those data collections and those studies. So for that, I would refer people to the Department of Education if anyone is interested in what the status of these studies are and if and when you might see another NIPSAS data collection uh, released. So let me tell you about these NCES post-secondary studies. So IPEDS is the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. It is, per NCES, a system of several interrelated surveys conducted annually that gathers data from every college, university, and technical and vocational institution that participates in the federal student financial aid Title IV programs. Any college or university or school in the United States that receives Title IV aid, that receives financial aid, is obligated to share IPEDS data. And when I say any and every, you need to really expand what you are thinking of when you are thinking of post-secondary institutions. That includes your very traditional 4 years, but that also includes your community colleges. That includes your private for-profit institutions. That includes your technical schools. That includes your beautician and cosmetology schools. Um, it includes schools in U.S. territories, outside the U.S. So it is a very comprehensive population of schools providing data for IPEDS. And we will contrast that with the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study, which are post-secondary surveys of cohorts of undergraduate and graduate college students, which provides information about how they finance education, how education is financed, about their persistence and attainment and their workforce outcomes. So there's a lot of information about two different studies that both address the same or similar topics. So even just with this, it can be difficult to understand what their differences are. But I will get to that. Let's dig in a little deeper. So IPEDS is a system of interrelated surveys conducted annually by NCES. Like I said, it gathers information from every college, university, and technical vocational institution that participates in those federal aid programs. It's mandated by law. It describes basic characteristics of institutions, enrollments, completions, completers, graduation rates and other outcome measures, faculty and staff, finances, institutional prices, student financial aid, admissions and academic libraries, and more. It's a very, very robust data set. And many organizations and individuals use IPEDS data, including lawmakers, federal and state agencies, schools, educators, media, and private industry. What are some of those uses of iPads? If you are not yet convinced that these data are of interest or use to you, I think it helps to illustrate their applications with some concrete examples of how they've been used in the past. So, for iPads, one of the foremost examples that the average person is most likely to be familiar with, anybody who's ever shopped for a college, whether a student or a student's family or parents, guardians, um, anybody who's ever tried to make a decision about where to go to college or where to send their kid to college, um, is likely familiar with the college scorecard, which shares sort of individualized profiles of all these different institutions, including information about the costs and debt and graduation rates and admission test scores, acceptance rates, student body, post-college earnings, and so forth. And it's a very useful website. You can filter by different institution characteristics, location, state, public or private, and so on. But it's not just so the college scorecard uses a lot of IPEDS data, also data from other sources like the Office of Federal Student Aid, to create a pretty comprehensive and well-rounded and detailed sort of resource for doing comparison shopping by schools. But it's not really the best tool for research, but a lot of researchers still use IPEDS data. So, for example, different states, Maryland used it to compare progress with national trends to inform state policy. It was used by Virginia to understand how changes in federal calculations of financial aid would impact budget projections and access to aid, and so forth. So, a lot of these sources I'm citing come from a blog series that the Institute for Higher Education Policy did last year, the case for IES post-secondary studies and resources, in the aftermath of all those contract cancellations, IHEP very helpfully did a blog series about you trying to justify the continued research activities by NCES in order to help argue for their preservation and continuation. And then for people who are interested in the value of these data sets to check out that blog series. Now, what is the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study, or NCES? It's a series, I've mentioned, of post-secondary surveys conducted every 4 years by NCES. It collects information from nationally representative cohorts of college students, supplements survey data with administrative data. So we would survey the students, but we'd also collect administrative data from lots of other sources, public and private, including IPEDS data chiefly, but also data from the Office of Student Aid, other sources within the government like FSA and the Veterans Administration and so forth, but also non-government sources for things like test scores. And also we would get data from the National Student Clearinghouse to round out the data. So lots of different sources. It's also mandated by law, which we enjoy noting, even though this doesn't seem to have meant much to the folks who canceled that contract. We went into the administration under the belief that these studies would be safe because they are legally required. But we are discovering that that is not quite the guarantee that we thought it once was. But nevertheless, the law is on the books, whether or not it's recognized or enforced. There it is. And NCES can provide information about post-secondary education, including financing and persistence and attainment and workforce outcomes of the students in the sample. It also includes information about post-secondary institutions, students, and staff. So for every student who's in the NCES data, we also have information about their institutions, the schools they go to. And it's used by academics and think tanks and policymakers to better understand the experiences and outcomes of college students. So ways that NCES has been used, the National Bureau of Economic Research used FAFSA data, which is included in NCES, to justify simplifying FAFSA in 2020, because NCES has FAFSA information about the students, but it also has information about the students' outcomes and other background characteristics. So you can use it, those data already merged, which gives you ways to look at how they are related to each other and predict each other. The GAO used it to analyze food and housing insecurity among college students, used by the Congressional Research Service to look at grants providing campus-based child care to low-income parents in post-secondary institutions to get a better picture of how financially disadvantaged college students care for their children. Used by California to look at needs and experiences of student parents in California. So I think it's part of a program evaluation. So we've got iPads and we've got NCES, and very broadly, these are two post-secondary surveys, two surveys of post-secondary data. And they, very broadly speaking, high level perspective, they can be used to answer a lot of very similar questions. You could, for example, if you want to get a sense of what the graduation rate is for post-secondary students nationwide, you could do that with both of these. So it's very easy if you're not familiar with them for your conception of what they can do to sort of like blend with each other. And I think when you're trying to figure out which data set is right for you, which you want to work with in your own research and your own analyses, to compare them side by side to help you make up your mind. So here's a side-by-side comparison. IPEDS is conducted every year. It's an annual survey, whereas NCES is conducted every 4 years. So right away there, if you are interested in data that's as fresh and as recent as possible, you're more likely to find that with IPEDS than with NCES. And IPEDS, unlike NCES, is a total universe of data. So IPEDS data, it functionally includes data for every single college or university or post-secondary institution in the US system. It is not a sample survey. It's not a case where we have to collect a small proportion of those colleges and universities and use those to generate universe-wide estimates. You don't have to really estimate things with IPEDS because you've got all the data. You can actually get what the actual percentages are with very little error. Whereas NCES is a representative sample. NCES does not include data for every single student in the United States. That would be pretty impossible because there are too many. So what we did with NCES is we actually select a representative sample, and we use those to generate estimates that are representative of the entire national population. So NCES is a little bit more statistically intensive in terms of what you need to do with it. If you're using it for analyses, you are generating estimates, and then you have to take into consideration things like power of those estimates and what's the sort of error for those, and how large are those cells within those samples or subsamples before you can feel confident reporting on them. IPEDS is used as the sampling frame for NCES. So for NCES, so basically what this means is that without IPEDS, there is no NCES. There's a one-directional relationship in terms of the dependencies here. For NCES, whenever we did a new NCES data collection, we actually did like a two-level sampling design where first we took a representative sample of all the colleges and universities in the nation. So we used IPEDS data for that to create a sampling frame at the top level. And then we would drop down a level to the student level to create a representative sample of all students in that representative sample of all colleges and universities nationwide. So IPEDS is school level data, NCES is student level data. So that sort of generates that can guide your decision of which data set to use when you ask yourself, what am I actually interested in here? Am I interested in the schools or am I interested in the students? And one way that distinction is important is when you are defining, I guess, what you would call academic attainment, academic success. So with IPEDS, you would use that to because it's school level data, you would use it to measure retention and graduation. You know, schools retain, schools retain students, schools graduate students. They are sort of the active. They are sort of like the subject of the sentence when you're discussing that kind of academic attainment. Whereas with NCES, you're measuring persistence and attainment. Students persist and students attain. They are sort of the subject of that sentence. And that can have some very important implications for your kind of research questions. So, for example, NCES, because it actually tracks students in its longitudinal spin-offs. I don't want to go into those details of that right now, but NCES includes longitudinal spin-offs where we would follow students for up to 6 years, which allows people to track persistence and attainment. And because these NCES studies are actually tracking students and studying students and collecting data on students, that allows NCES to look at persistence and attainment even when students change schools. So you can get those completion rates for students who complete at their first institution with NCES. And you can do that with IPEDS. What IPEDS doesn't let you do is get those completion rates for students who change schools. So if you want for example, more sort of comprehensive, inclusive definition of academic attainment and success, you may consider using NCES for that reason. And finally, very important here, IPEDS data is public. NCES data is restricted. And the short answer to why is because IPEDS data, because it's on the level of the school, there's not as much risk for any sort of thing, anything like personally sensitive or identifying or private in those data. Whereas NCES data, because it's on the level of students, it's on the level of actual people, we have to be a lot more protective of those data. So let's say you've made up your mind for whichever reason that you want to use IPEDS data. IPEDS data is public, so anyone can use it online. To use IPEDS data, you will navigate to this website, ncs.ed.gov/IPEDS. And I'm going to try to do a short demonstration here of the IPEDS website for the benefit of anyone who's interested in visiting it. Click on that link and okay, browser opened on my wrong screen, so I'm going to drag it over here. And okay, it looks like everyone can see the IPEDS landing screen. So yeah, here it is, IPEDS. So you will see there's a lot of little drop-down menus. So if you're not sure where to go exactly, you might be uncertain where to go if you're not familiar with this website. So for our present purposes here, I will show you, we don't want to go too far in depth. I will show you where I go when I want to use IPEDS data. I go to use the data, and I go to compare institutions, and we go into the IPEDS data center. I'm going to start over. Here we go. I've got some selections from an earlier session. I'm going to try again. Oh, you're kidding me. Here we go. All right, go to use the data, compare institutions. There we go. So this is sort of like the default starting screen. I want to, I see you have a question from Hope. Would the student's completion rate become recorded at the second school with IPEDS, or are they removed completely from the data? It's not so much that they're removed from the data, it's more that IPEDS, so completion rate recorded at the second school. IPEDS doesn't really have the capacity, I think, to collect those data in the first place. When IPEDS, from what I remember, and I don't think this has changed, when IPEDS calculates its graduation rates, they focus just on those students who have continued at that same institution. Because when the schools are responding to IPEDS questionnaires, they don't have easy access to data on completion at other institutions. So when you look at the variable, the iPad's variable on completions, I think. And we don't want completions because that's a sort of number of awards per year. We want graduation rates. So, for example, graduation within 100% of time. And you have some, so you have here some information about the cohorts. And you can choose like grand total. And you can, as I recall, do exclusion. So there's information about the cohorts here. And for these graduation rates, you're getting an adjusted cohort, which is a revised cohort minus exclusions. And those exclusions include things like transfer out students or no longer enrolled, stop outs. So, so when you get the graduation rate, you have to sort of like exclude those people who might complete elsewhere because institutions do not have ready access to that information. I hope that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I hope it was helpful. Let me see. I want to make sure I'm not missing any answers or any questions. Patience is asking, can someone use iPad's data to compare HBCs? So are we talking about historically Black colleges, HBCUs, to other universities? And the short answer is yes. And that is, I think, so that gives us a good starting point for this demonstration. That is, so when I was first getting trained and experienced on iPads, that was like my go-to analysis was HBCUs versus other institutions. So I'm going to go ahead and use that as my working example for this demonstration. Um, and so if we are at this landing page where we're selecting institutions, you have many ways to select a group of institutions for analysis. I recommend checking out Easy Group to see what some of those options are. And if you go here, you see that you have selections, you have the option of special missions, HBCUs. So you can select just HBCUs if you only want data on HBCUs right off the bat. And if you can see this little number right here shows you you have selected by clicking that box 102 HBCUs that are in the system. And you can click on search to generate a list of those institutions. And if you're satisfied with that selection, you could click continue to actually look at variables. But patients ask, can someone use iPad's data to compare HBCU schools to other universities? So for that purpose, it's not enough just to select HBCUs. We need to select non-HBCUs. So we're going to do things a little different. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to start over. We can instead choose all Title IV institutions, all Title IV U.S. service, lots of different options here. I'm going to do all institutions. So this is data now. We're selecting all 6,050 institutions in iPads. So that'll give us a very, very large sample that we can use for this kind of comparison to HBCUs and non-HBCUs. I'm going to click on search. I'm going to disregard the previous set and keep this one, even though this new set of institutions will include the old set because it includes everybody. So now we have the option to get data on all 6,000 plus institutions in the system. And I'm going to, at this point now, we're going to start big. I'm going to continue to select variables. So if we want to compare HBCUs to other universities, then this data set is going to need to include a flag for HBCUs. Luckily, iPads is remembering our selection before. So I'm going to click this box. So what this means is that when we sort of download the data set, it's going to include a variable, sort of a categorical flag of HBCUs versus non-HBCUs. Finally, if we want to compare HBCUs to non-HBCUs, what are we comparing them on? Does anybody want to suggest something that they are interested in looking at where we would like to compare HBCUs to non-HBCUs? Type it into the chat, and I will take a suggestion. Okay, graduation rates, great. So let's look at variables. We're going to browse and search variables. Here we go. just to speed things along, frequently used variables, graduation rates. We're going to get the most recent graduation rate total cohort. I want you to see that you have lots of options for different demographic sort of breakdowns. Oh, and STEM graduates. Sure. Let's look at completions, degrees, awards, number of students receiving degree certificates, most recent year. No, that's not quite what we want. Degree classification. Let's see. Okay, so instead of that, I'm going to go ahead and make sure we have this saved. Let's see. Um, Here we go. Awards, degrees confirmed by program. We review the total number, classifications. So I think, actually, hold on. Let me see if we have a quick and easy STEM awards variable. So I'm going to look for STEM. Frequently used. No, that's institutions. No. Okay, so I don't see anything that's very STEM specific. So we are going to look at first or second major, save, zip code. Okay, I'm not going to, I think in the past I actually had to basically construct an aggregate STEM variable using some options here. I don't want to take too much time doing that, so I'm going to grab a few that, look like we should include them in STEM. So we got some math, we got some bio, we got some engineering. I'm a psychologist by training, so I'm going to throw myself a bone here by including psychology. Okay, save. And then we will click continue. Okay, we missed something. Awards, degrees. Here we go. We missed a word level code. We'll do bachelor's degrees. There we go. And continue. So we have here a screen showing our variable selections, including that HBCU flag, including awards degrees by program, bachelor's degrees, and also the graduation rate total. I'm going to click continue now. And here we can choose whether we can download it as a spreadsheet or if we'll view it on screen. Normally, I recommend downloading it as a spreadsheet because that's easier to work with. But I want you to see it, so we're going to view it on the screen. Click continue. This will take a long time to progress. Well, we'll take our chances. There we go. So here is output showing we've got the column headers on top. We've got each row is a different institution, and we have options for downloading value labels, modifying, and so forth. Okay, I think time is crunching a bit. So that is your very brief introduction to iPads. There's so much more you can do. I have another webinar next month where I'm going to spend a lot more time on iPads. So if you want more on iPads, I'm going to remind you about that webinar at the end of this webinar, which we will now resume. Let's see. Nope. Let's see. I got to go to. Here we go. So now we're going to talk about accessing NCES. NCES data is not public. So NCES users have two options for using NCES. PowerStats, which is an online tool that you can use for analyzing the data without directly accessing the data. So that's the key thing there. PowerStats is a website where you can go to, and it sort of sits on top of the restricted data file itself without letting you, the user, access the data directly. Instead, you can ask PowerStats to run different statistical analyses on NCES. If PowerStats doesn't let you do the analyses you need to do, you can request a restricted use data, which is, how often is iPad's data updated? Annually. It's an annual survey. There are different survey components in iPads, and they are often updated at different times. But overall, it's an annual thing, whereas NCES is usually every 4 years because it's a lot more intense in terms of the work involved. Okay, so how to access NCES through PowerStats. Anyone can use PowerStats. It includes over 100 NCES datasets. PowerStats is on a website called Data Lab, which we will navigate to now. There we go. So this is the landing page for Data Lab. There's a lot of options here. I want to respect our time. So I'm rather than go over what all the options are, I'm going to direct your attention to the toolbar on the left. You'll see we've got the tables library and power stats and an online code book. We want power stats. Power stats will let us run analyses on NCES and many other data sets. Click on that. I have starred here's a long list of data sets available for analysis through power stats. And if you see one you like, you can click on that star and it'll sit at the top. We are interested in NCES. So I'm going to go ahead and we've got different years. If you click on this, you get information about the study. I'm going to go ahead and launch NCES in PowerStats. I need to set the usage terms and log in. And here we are in the NCES window. To compare and contrast, I want to, and also to respect our time, I want to try to do a very quick demonstration of a sort of similar analysis to what we did in the iPad's data editor. In iPads, we asked the question, can we compare HBCUs to non-HBCUs? And oh, here, let me zoom in on the screen here. Let me see. Hopefully that helps. And I want to compare HBCUs to non-HBCUs in terms of graduation rates. So this is not an all-inclusive survey of what's in NCES or in PowerStats, but this is to give us a sense of the kinds of things you can do. So if we want to do a comparison of graduation rates, graduation rates are percentages. So we want percentage distributions, but actually graduation rates, I think we want the average across HBCUs or the average across students. There's lots of different ways you can approach these questions. Let's do percentage distribution. Let's look for, if we have an HBCU indicator. You see in the search window, I type HBCU. Can we use information from PowerStats for proposals or papers? You can do anything you want with it. Of course, proposal requirements, different funders will have different requirements. But we do have some reporting and output options in PowerStats that makes it easy to save your work. And I'll try to give you a brief overview of what they are at the end of this demonstration. So here we have the HBCU indicator. I'm going to drag it over here. And we have in this variable, yes or no. Do they go to an HBCU or not? Now, graduation rates. Let me see what we can get. Actually, you know what? Let me go. So BPS is part of NCES. So we're going to use BPS. It's a spin-off longitudinal study. So this is still using NCES data, but under a different name. Here we have HBCU, if that was their first school. I'm going to drop it here, yes or no. Oh, is there a cost to use this platform? PowerStats and iPads are free. They are taxpayer provided. Your taxes pay for them. And that doesn't necessarily always mean it's free to the public, but it should. And in this case, it is. And that makes them extremely helpful cost-saving tools for researchers who operate on shoestring budgets, as so many of us do. So here we have an HBCU indicator, and here we're going to get, we want to get, I think, completion. Here we go. Persistence. Let's try. The degree attainment. Here we go. Okay, then you get the percentage that that attain degrees at their institutions. Okay, I can zoom out a bit here. These are the default values. Actually, hold on. Let me edit that a bit. I'm going to make a custom category here. So they attained or they did not attain. Category. So, let's see. Okay. So here we have, this is a preview of what the output's going to be. Is the only way to know what data they have just by going in and poking around? I'm interested in how many students engage in undergraduate research. So that's a great question. That's a great way to learn. It's not the only way to learn. NCES provides a suite of online dataset training tools, which I'm going to share at the end of this presentation. So here we have a preview of the output. We're trying to get um, uh, completion rates by HBCU versus non-HBCU. I'm going to run the table. We're going to use the recommended weights, and we are going to wait for the table to load. There it is. Obtaining bachelor's degree. Oh no, this is actually wrong. It's been a while. I'm going to go back to the workspace. I'm going to swap the categories. Change the obtain here. Patreon categories. Category. Save. And then ECU. Indicator. It's going to go under those. Save. And then run. Okay. For example, here are the percentage of those who attained their degree or not, um, and for HBCUs versus non-HBCUs. In terms of output, you have options here. You can download the data as a spreadsheet or Excel file or PDF. You can also email it to yourself in various ways. So I want to return to our presentation because we're running low on time. You may find that even with Power Stats, you can't do the analyses you want to do. Oh, I see a question. Okay, no, that's about training. Okay, so if you want to access the micro level data, you have to apply for a license. And the short answer for why is that because it has individual level information about students, um, the we restrict who has access to them to protect the identities and privacy of those participants. So those are you have to apply for a license. You're prohibited from using the data other than the purposes other than those for which you told us, and you cannot share those data. To apply for the license, you've got to submit documents. You have to make certain agreements. You have to justify your use of the data. When I was at NCES, quite a bit of my work was helping applicants who were trying to get the restricted data. Well, I was reviewing those applications, and that meant reviewing whether or not they actually needed the data they were applying for. So in your applications, you will have to justify the use of the data. To apply for the data, you go to researchdata.gov.org. You're going to click on National Center for Education Statistics. You will search for NCES using the filters or the search bar. Choose which NCES collection you want. You probably want the most recent one. Then you will request access. You have to sign into the website. Choose it. And then you start an application in this window. And you have to provide information about your research team. So who are your investigators and researchers who are going to have access to the data? And you need information about your project, quite a bit of information, including your justification for using these data. And then you submit your application. So here's an overview of what we went over in this presentation. But I want to share some useful links. In particular, I referenced a lot of these in the presentation, but somebody asked about training. So we at NCES have what's called the Distance Learning Dataset Training, DLDT. And just a very quick reference of what that is. This is, I kind of sometimes describe these as like instructional, they're kind of like YouTube videos. I think they're a bit more advanced than that. But you have a large menu, you have some introductory trainings that you can use, which if you click on them, you basically will see a slideshow presentation with audio narration on different topics, including introductions. So if you're just getting introduced to these, I recommend here. And then if you know what you want, but want more information about it, for example, NCES, you could go here to the longitudinal sample studies and get training on those. Okay, please share your question. I'm sorry, there's rather less time than I'd hoped you'd have for questions, but many of you are asking questions during the presentation. So I hope you were able to get some valuable information from those. When do I have another session? So in a month, I believe on the 18th of March, I think. Christine will let me know if that's the correct date.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm doing another webinar where I'm going to be focusing. I'm co-presenting on federal statistical data, and I'll be spending a lot more time on mostly iPads data and also the college scorecard. So if you are interested in iPads or the college scorecard or just in post-secondary data in general, I hope you will join us for that session next month. You're welcome. Thank you. Will the survey, let me see. Will the survey data results not be made available to the public? Is that right? The NCES survey data are not made available to the public because those are data collected on individual students. For those, you either need to use PowerStats or you need to request a restricted use data set from NCES. Whereas iPads data is always open to the public and anyone can go to that website I showed you and just download the data sets from there. Okay. If there are no further questions, I want to share this landing screen. You've got some QR codes there. You can see more information about future events and webinars on the top left. The Heroes webpage has more information about the Heroes Fellowship Program, including myself and my other team members on the Fellows team. And pardon me, that bottom QR code will give you a chance to provide feedback on the webinar, which I hope you will do. And thank you so much for your time and attention. Like I said, I love talking about these data, and I run the risk of getting a little bit long-winded sometimes discussing it. So if you didn't have a chance to ask a question, please follow up with us, and I'll do my best to help you. You can schedule an office hour with me, and we'll have a lot more time to go into depth on these data and how they can help you. The survey link, it's not a survey link, it's a QR code. It's right there on the screen. So you've got to scan that with your phone, I think. Oh, and there's the link. Thank you, Christine.
David, also, I want to make sure that these two questions got answered.
Oh,
One is the only way to know what data they have just by going in and poking around? I'm interested in how many students engaged in undergraduate research graduate from all types of schools. Do these data sets have research engagement information? I don't know if I heard the answer.
research. Um, let's see. Research engagement information. I'm trying to scroll up to that because I'm trying to
Yeah,
understand
it's
what you
like a
mean.
compound question.
Yeah. Let's see. Is that the answer? Is that question in the chat or in the Q&A
It's in the
window?
chat, 11:49.
11:49. Ooh, oh boy. Oh my goodness. Oh, 12:49. Sorry, we're in different time
Oh,
zones.
I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah.
no,
I
no,
mean,
no, no. I was like, wait, we haven't even started yet. No, no, my fault. 12:49. Oh, interested in how many students engaged in undergraduate research graduate from all types of schools. Do these data sets have research engagement information? I think you'd be more likely to find that in NCES. So one last demonstration here, I think. Something I recommend doing if you want to know what's in NCES or any of these data sets. When you go here, um, if you expand a window for a particular data set, so for example, we're looking at detailed information for NCES undergraduate. We also have graduate student data, but the same principle applies. You can see under here, code books, you can look at variables by subject and by name. So a really nice tip is to click on this link, and this will, or it should, here it is, generate a website which contains a list of all the variables available to you in NCES. And something you can do here is, if you're looking for, as I'm sort of like, let me see, typos everywhere. You can sort of do searches for different terms to see what comes up. Um, so, for example, classifications of institutions and so forth. But that right there, clicking on this variables by subject or variables by name link will generate for you a list of all the variables that are available for analysis in PowerStat. So that's a great way to get a sense of what's available for you to do. So I'm sorry I missed that question earlier. Are there any other questions?
Yep.
So, the last part of that was, do these data sets have research engagement information? No.
I'm not sure. Maybe. Um, maybe, depending on how you're defining that. So I would recommend, for example, if you're in this student, if you're in this code book, looking for information about education experiences, and sometimes that might give you information, or you might look at different kind of information about student programs. So the answer for that is maybe. And sometimes you have to dig in the code book. And even if you don't necessarily find exactly what you're looking for, sometimes you find something that makes a useful proxy or approximates what you're looking for. So
Okay.
that's something you can try by exploring the code book.
Next question, is the NPSAS survey available so we can see the questions asked?
That's a really good question. So in that, for that, if you're looking here in Power Stats, now this is a bit of a roundabout process here, but if you visit the study homepage and this loads, let's see, and here you go, survey. Now they've recently redesigned the website, so I can't necessarily vouch for everything being in the right place. But I'm going to click on questionnaires here. And if this doesn't work, here we go. NCES 20 item wording for student survey and student records. And so, okay, short answer is yes. If you want to see the questionnaire, you can navigate to the NCES website, and then you look to the page for NPSAS, and there you can find information about, you can download the NPSAS 20 question. All right.
So
Well, I hope
David,
that was it. Yeah, I hope that was helpful and not overwhelming. I'll hand it off to our host to close things down. But like I said, if you have more questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer.
and if you'll pop up your last screen again, that would be great.
Oh
Your
yeah.
last slide.
All right. Yeah. Here we go.
Thank
Do I
you
think
very
more
much.
surveys are coming? Maybe. I hope so, but I can't promise you that they will until they're actually published. Um, so that's a question for the Department of Education and also potentially your congressional representatives.
Thank you so much, David, for a very informative presentation and for the audience engagement today. Please join us for a future QEM webinar. We have robotic exploration of Mars tomorrow, which will surely be very interesting. Thank you so much and have a great day, everyone.